Next on the witness stand is board-certified forensic and clinical psychologist, Dr. Dawn Hughes. She's an expert witness and she's there to testify why victims stay in abusive relationships, but she is not speaking about Cassie or Diddy. There were also things that she was not going to speak on, which were coercive control, psychological aggression, and post-separation assault. She testified that it's very common for victims to stay in abusive relationships through something called a trauma bond, which she said is a psychological attachment that forms between the victim and the abuser through a cycle of affection, control, fear, and sometimes even love. She explained how abusive relationships often show moments of kindness and emotional connection, which she said was the honeymoon phase. She said abusers will love bomb and shower their victim with gifts, affection, and apologies in order to reel them back in. And victims will stay because they feel trapped emotionally, physically, or financially. She said the idea of leaving becomes difficult or feels even impossible when the abuser is controlling housing, transportation, or access to money. And beyond physical abuse, she says psychological abuse plays a huge role in keeping the victim stuck, which includes intimidation, threats, controlling what the victim wears or where they go, and constant surveillance. She said the abuse does not have to be constant, but even the possibility that it could happen again is enough to create deep fear. And then she talks about SA and how it's especially isolating. She says it carries deep shame, degradation, and humiliation, which makes it extremely hard for victims to talk about, even with people they trust. And she said when victims feel like no one will believe them, especially when the abuser is powerful or famous, they're even less likely to come forward. She also talks about how victims will cope in one major way is placating, saying that they are trying to keep the abuser calm, doing whatever it takes to avoid another episode. They could also try to minimize the abuse by trying to convince themselves that it wasn't that bad or that the abuser was having a bad day, which I'm glad she said, because remember Cassie's former best friend Carrie said that Cassie was saying that Carrie over-exaggerated Diddy's abuse, which shows how she tried to minimize it. Dr. Hughes also said that many victims will turn to substance abuse to try to numb themselves. She said a common strategy is to ward off the pain or anxiety they feel, especially if they're about to see the abuser again, which I'm really glad she said that, because remember Diddy's team was trying to say that Cassie was using substances when she was not around Diddy. In other words, Diddy wasn't the one trying to force her to use them. When it comes to memory, Dr. Hughes said that victims may remember some details vividly, like a smell or a sound, but forget the rest. And sometimes the instances of abuse start to blur together like routine memories. They might remember that it happened often, but not exactly when. She said the victims rarely disclose when the abuse happens and said it's much more common for them to open up later, after the relationship ends, after they've received therapy, or once they feel safe. And when they do speak up, their words can be fragmented and unsure. They might not call themselves victim and might not call the abuser an abuser. And she said many are still stuck in a state of self-blame. All of this is important because it shows that even though Cassie stayed or she minimized the abuse or